hopefully stimulate some ideas and see if this product or products could be a valid solution for you out there. Okay. With that, we'll get into our introductions. We'll go over why we made the module, what does it do, how are people using it, a lot of different things, some of the specs that are involved, what are you going to need to get started. As we go along through this session, it is being recorded. You will receive, after this webinar is complete, we'll be sending out an email in a few days. You get the recording all together so that you'll have a link to review it later. And
have that available for you, hopefully along with a little survey to make sure this was useful for you. As we're going along, if you have
any questions, stimulated thoughts come up, enter them in there. We'll be monitoring that continuously, and we'll pause occasionally, and we'll also have time at the end for questions as well. So with that, introductions, as I said before, my name's Ken Roslin with ProSoft. I'm in the marketing group, and with me is
Larry Friesen. I'm in the tech support department here at ProSoft, and before I came here, I was a professional developer for 15 years. So this module and what we're introducing here is very close to me, you could say. It's something that I'm very interested in, and I take a special interest in it, and it's very enjoyable to work with. I think it's a great solution that needs as much attention as it can get because of how powerful it is.
Very good. Well, let's talk more about why did we make this product. We've been hearing from customers. They've been contacting us and saying, you know what, I got some code that I'm running in my PLC, but it's very complicated. Ladder's not very efficient, it's difficult to develop. I got some new programmers coming in right out of the colleges or universities, and these individuals are more familiar with C or C++ type programming than they are traditional ladder. And some, algorithms are kind of pretty tough to program that way. We've heard from some other customers that said, hey, ProSoft, you make a lot of great communication cards, but I got this odd piece of equipment that I have to talk to. I got to get data from it, and it has an Ethernet or serial port on it, but nothing out there is available for the protocol interface. We've had other customers contact us and said, I want to write my custom algorithm, and I can write it in the PLC, maybe using structured text, but I don't want anyone to see it. It's my own custom algorithm. It's why I get paid the money I make. Maybe an OEM saying, you know what, I don't want to just lock it down with a password. It becomes very painful for myself to support as well as for my customers that I sell the machines to. Be nice if there was a way I could have a product that could run my compiled code and nobody could see it. And then lastly, a lot of them come in saying, hey, I've got this code that'll work really good, but I don't want to put a PC in. PCs have lots of complications, the Windows environment, maintaining them, security patches, getting permission by the IT group to even put it on the site. Those are some of the challenges that we heard about. So in response to that, we thought that we would sit there and said, what if you had a module that could go in the chassis and act like a coprocessor? Kind of like a PC, but it's not a PC. It could run your custom code. You can compile it, download it, and it would just run your application over and over and over again and have none of the IT maintenance issues. You load it, you run it, can run out there for 10 years straight. It would come along with some of the Ethernet communications that you need. You got TCP/IP stack, some of these other protocols that are built into it, so you don't have to develop. It isn't a total blank sheet of paper. You have some code, and because it sits in the backplane, one of the other things you need in there is you need to be able to communicate and get data from the PLC, sending it, receiving it, and it would come with an API so that you could be able to easily communicate with your PLC system. And by the way, we thought, maybe if it ran C or C++, they're pretty popular. I know there's C# and a few others. We thought we'd pick one of the more common, easier protocols or languages out there to develop in. So with that, Larry, could you tell me more about some of the details of this product? It's not a PC, but yet I can run my application.
Right, Ken. So what it is, it's an industrial fanless design, no moving parts. It has a very popular industrialized ARM processor that is designed to run your code and run it very, very quickly at the assembly language level so that it can run and perform operations very fast and still be industrialized and common enough to be easy to use. The module also has 64 megabytes of memory for your application to run in, which is on a embedded Linux device like this, that's actually quite a bit of memory when you consider what the program is doing. It's not supporting a user interface and all the things that programs that might run in Windows do and other apps like that. These are very tightly knit, to the core. This is what it does, and this is all it's going to do. So along with that, we give 256 megs of what's known as like file system memory. Because it's a Linux box, it has a file system on it where you can store log files or firmware images that you upload, modifications, things of that nature. So you're not designing a program that just fits on a chip and that's all it does. You have a lot of flexibility and more things you can do. And I can talk a lot more about that as we get a little deeper into this to kind of explain what some people have done with it and the advantages to having a file system like that.
Very good. So tell me a little bit more about, that's great, but how do I communicate out this other than the backplane?
On the ControlLogix module, we have 2 Ethernet ports. There's 2 serial ports, and we have a scrolling display. Like I'm sure most people are familiar with all the modern ControlLogix processors and modules that have status displays right on the front, so that you can have your alarms and notifications or general status, the health of the module, how things are going, and how it's working. The CompactLogix one, it has 1 Ethernet port. It's of course designed a little bit smaller and for smaller and maybe not quite as intense applications, but we still have the 2 serial ports. So we can communicate to 2 separate RS-232 devices, or we can have 2 different RS-485 networks, and on some of them I've even seen them using RS-422, or we can have a large network that's full duplex for messages coming in and messages going out, the serial port, which is a very common application that a lot of these are used in, is for serial data. We also have 6 different LEDs on the front of the CompactLogix module, again for alerts and statuses. They're multicolor LEDs, so they can be red or green or amber to indicate if there's a fault scenario or some type of error scenario. It makes it much easier to spot.
Well, that sounds really interesting because, we all know you build it, it works, but things happen. Sometimes things go wrong. Sounds like it would be very powerful to be able to have whoever develops the application for this have control over those diagnostics so they can put the information and help that customer when something goes wrong to reduce their downtime, right? They quickly can figure out what's going on.
Yes, absolutely. And all of these LEDs and scrolling displays are fully controllable by the programmer. So in the application, they can control the state of the LED and on the CompactLogix model, even the color of the LEDs. And on the ControlLogix module, of course, they have full access to the display to scroll whatever status messages they deem necessary. They can scroll, like anybody familiar with our modules, we scroll OK, and the IP address, and often sometimes the configuration. And that's kind of the same effect there, is you have full control over all of these LEDs and the status.
Very good. Very interesting. So what else does this come with? That's the hardware, so what's some of the software and firmware stuff?
Right. Now, of course, with this, we need a way to program and write our software for the module. So what we give the customer is a Linux virtual machine that's run with VMware or VM Player. If they don't own a copy of VMware, it'll run on VM Player.
Yeah, that's good.
And that allows them and what comes with it is we give them the Eclipse IDE for developing C and C++ programs. That's already installed on it. Of course, there's a lot of sample code on it, which is probably the biggest benefit there. Is we show you how, like as I mentioned, these scrolling displays, we give you code that shows you how to use them. How do you make a message show up? How do you scroll it? And how do you turn LEDs on? We have sample code that demonstrates all of that, as well as how to communicate with the serial ports, how to communicate on the Ethernet ports, how to talk to a ControlLogix or CompactLogix backplane, and even how to read and write individual controller tags in the PLC. And if you deem necessary, you can even read controller tags from other PLCs.
That sounds really interesting. So with that, one of the things is we sell this module out there, and you may, hopefully if you're an OEM, you're buying a lot of these, you don't need the VMware image over and over and over again. So we don't throw the DVD in the box with it and have you guys throw all those away. We've seen that. We're trying to avoid filling up landfills. So we sell that separately, very nominal cost. You get one copy of the DVD, and it comes with the IDE environment, VMware image, all configured, ready to roll. And then if you look at our hardware, you notice that because of space on the front of our hardware, it's not easy to put your traditional serial ports that you see in the field a lot. We have these RJ45. So Larry, what else comes in there?
Well, in the box you get two RJ45 to DB9 serial. That allows you access to the two serial ports in the ControlLogix module, and again in the CompactLogix module you get the two as well. There's two Nullmodem cables in there, so you can connect to the module and log into it. Since it is a Linux machine, a headless Linux box, there is a shell running on it. So you can log in through the Nullmodem cable, connecting that to your PC. We include those in the box, as well as our little, what we call around here, our 1454 9F, which is a DB9 to Phoenix screw terminal. So you can wire up your serial cable to any strange device out there that might use odd wiring or odd cabling. You have the ability to hook all that up, and that comes with the module. So you don't have to go hunt down special cables or try and spend much time building a custom cable. We kind of give you all that right there in the box. And then one of the biggest advantages that the module really comes with is me. Yeah. And our technical support department here, in that we don't just sell this module and give it to people and hope that they'll figure it out. Yeah. It takes a little getting used to, and of course we have documentation. We have the user manual that explains how to set it up and how to use it. But sometimes it's just you might not have time to read that cover to cover, yes. And you might want to just call in. So you've got access to me via our telephone support, or you can email me. And if you call in, you just ask our customer service reps to ask for me by name, and I'll be glad to help anybody out with any questions they have, getting familiar with it, or even if they're just not sure if it will fit their solution. So the main thing is that we just don't want to turn people loose with it and just hope they're successful. We want to make sure they're successful with this.
Right. Well, and I also noticed that we do supply it with what we call a module recovery image. We know people, do a good job, do it, but occasionally, every once in a while, somebody could write some bad code and what we call brick the module, lock it up. You've kind of really messed yourself up. We only did this because it happened. It doesn't happen often, but we want to be there. We want to make sure that you don't have to send a module back in because you did something that you weren't quite as good on your programming as you thought you were. And so we have this module recovery image provided on the module so you can reset it, reflash it, get it back to factory defaults, and you no longer have any of these issues. So that's kind of a nice thing to have as a safety net, just in case I do something not
yes, and that has been known to happen. Even I myself, yep. I will admit that I've had to use that recovery image maybe once or twice.
Yep.
So it has been known to happen, and that is in the module as it comes out of the box. When you bring up the web page for the module, you go to the default IP address, and there's a link there. And as long as the setup jumper is installed, you can restore your original file system like that.
Excellent. Well, with that, we'll continue on. So, this is the really interesting part. So, Larry, I know you shared with me a few interesting applications, like you share with the audience here. Customers call up, they got interesting challenges, they're running into this problem, they don't know how to solve it. Share a couple. I mean, this module can do so many different things. Share some really interesting ones you've run into, the problems and the solutions.
So a lot of the problems that we get often come in where they're looking for, or looking at maybe one of our existing modules, and they're trying to solve their problem with something we have that already exists. And sometimes that's not quite so easy. So in talking with them, I'll often uncover what's really going on, and I'll find these interesting solutions that can be done with this module, and a lot of them are really surprised and glad, and they take this and run with it. Some of the more interesting ones that I've seen are people wanting a way to send SMS messages when a fault occurs, or something bad occurs based on I/O when certain things, certain states occur. They want to send an SMS message to an engineer who can go on site and solve the problem. So the module's been used for that. There was a case where we had these AGVs that were running around the plant floor, and they had, I think, 1,038 of these devices. And they were trying to control them with just a ControlLogix processor and an Ethernet card. And they quickly discovered that that's not happening. So with the LDM module, they were able to have all of those devices communicating over UDP, and they were receiving their coordinates of where they were, and they were able to also send packets back to them to tell them where to go. And we were able to come up with that solution with the LDM, and it didn't even break a sweat doing that, because it's just sending UDP packets and updating the PLC and based on where they need to go. That was a very interesting one, and a very fun one to work on as well, because I'd never really worked with positioning like that with AGVs before. There have one of the more interesting ones, I think, that I was involved with was they needed, it was a ride developer, and they were developing these new virtual reality rides where the riders wear a VR headset and they're in a motion simulator. So you get the best of both worlds, where you're not able to see your surrounding things in the room to take away your feel from the ride. But the problem they had was they had to start these headsets. There was 150 some headsets that were riding for riders in various rooms of these motion rides. And the important thing they had to do was start the video to synchronize it so that the motion was in sync with the video. And they didn't really have a good idea on how to do that. They were a little bit panicked, how are we going to do this? And I worked with them, and I came up with a really easy solution for them, which was we used the web server built into the LDM, that these headsets could connect to this web server and just receive packet data on when to start the video, when to stop, and even which video to start, which segments of the video they were in. Mm-hmm. And in the conversation, they had mentioned to me that they also had this issue of, well, what about battery life? How do they know when the headsets are low? How do they know when to take certain ones out of service and charge them and such? And in just hearing them talk, I had the easy solution for them. I told them, well, you're making an HTTP connection. Let's just send the battery life info in the HTTP request packet. And now you've got it all the time. And so they were really thrilled by that, and I think that worked out remarkably well for them. And that was going on several, they deployed that at several different locations, and it's one of my favorite ones because
Yeah.
I'm big into that type of stuff.
Yeah, I've been involved with Universal Studios and some other ones where they were trying to synchronize what you feel and what you see. And if you don't synchronize those well, you will have all your passengers get off and throwing up, and it won't be a pretty picture. So it's
Right.
amazing what your body can feel and what your eyes see, and when they don't line up, bad things happen. So it sounds like a really interesting and cool application. I might even want to
Yeah.
go try that myself. Maybe
Yeah,
someday.
and I've even had OEMs that were building large machines, and they already had them built, and they were feeding these large ASCII strings for their recipe for the machine to cut, sort, and group these parts together for these devices that they're building. And they were trying to store these large strings in the PLC. So they wanted to add a PLC to their machine, and it would have their recipes built in, but they quickly saw the problem. What if we have to make a change to the recipe? What do we do now? So not only were they quickly ran out of memory in the PLC, and that was one of the biggest problems for them.
Memory in a PLC is very expensive.
Yes, and so our solution was adding the LDM and using its compact flash card that you can add to the control logics model. We had now a storage device. So we could store these large megabyte long ASCII strings, and it allowed them to build a web interface in the LDM so that the engineers and designers that were designing devices to come out of this machine, they could upload their new recipes right from a web interface. They could start the machine from that same interface, tell it to produce one of these, and they could verify it as it comes out, build it, make sure all the parts are there and all the stuff they do. But the other advantages they had was that they had these existing recipes stored in the module, and they could just pull one up when they need it and then feed it into the PLC, which of course then controlled all of the machines, and or the parts of the machine, I should say. And that's a real common application I see is oftentimes OEMs are the ones reaching out to us because they have their unique machinery, their unique device, but all their customers, or more, the majority of their customers have Rockwell PLCs that they want to integrate this into, but they don't have a Rockwell interface.
Right.
Now they do.
Yeah.
So with our backplane access, they can now communicate directly to the PLC. They can integrate with e-stop buttons and all of the things that give them the benefit. You know, their customers want to integrate this in their Allen Bradley PLCs. Now they have as an integrated device as they could possibly have. And so that is one of my favorite ones to design because I really feel like I'm helping them solve a real problem, and they feel rewarded because now they actually have an Allen Bradley interface and they can tie it right in, and it oftentimes involves a lot less C and C++ code than they might imagine. They might think it's a major task to write this whole giant process, and oftentimes it's just a little bit of code to tie these pieces here that you need in, and your code is just kind of organizing and controlling that. And then with the Allen Bradley backplane access and everything, you can kind of use the two in unison. So the LDM is sending data to the controller, and then in your controller, your ladder says what to do with it, tells your I/O what to do, and then you can get feedback back into the LDM to make decisions on what's coming next.
Pretty
So
cool.
those are just a small taste of some of the examples and things I've seen.
Very good. Well, we have a question that came in here. So, can this LDM work as a standalone device, or do I have to have a PLC module?
That's an interesting question. The LDM actually does act as a standalone module. If you had a ControlLogix chassis with no processor, and you put the LDM module in there, it will power up and act as a Unix machine, and you can access the Ethernet ports on it and the serial ports and all that, but you're not connected to a processor, so you're kind of limited on what you can really do at that point. But it does act as a standalone Unix device, if you will, and you could theoretically connect out from that standalone rack and connect to, say, another processor somewhere else,
Yep.
and communicate with that. Now, obviously, you don't have backplane access,
You do that
but
over Ethernet.
you have Ethernet or even serial if you're connecting to an older PLC that might have DF1 or some other protocols like that.
Or someone's trying
You
to
could
build a
do that.
unique gateway where they wanted to go from a weird Ethernet protocol to a serial protocol. They just want to bring the data in and push it right back out. Right? They have some
Right.
serial device they're trying to get to put out there on HTTP or some other Ethernet protocol. Could be used for something like that.
Yes, it can, and it has. Although most of the applications I've seen, they do involve a processor in the rack as well. But it is unique in that it doesn't have to have a processor to function.
Could it talk just to I/O cards and act kind of sort of like a low-end PLC where it's kind of reading in some devices, some I/O?
Well, it's not really in that sense, because all of the backplane access in the control logic is controlled from the processor. So in order to control I/O cards, we would have to be able to talk to the processor to tell it what to do with the I/O
So
cards.
we can't directly talk to an I/O card and control it.
Right. Yeah, we're not intended to be a processor like a
PLC
like-
replacement.
like we're not going to replace an L73 processor or something. We're going to work in tandem with it to. Oftentimes we're offloading ladder operations, and I have talked to customers who built ladders with a special algorithm for what they're doing that actually take like minutes to run, and in the LDM it takes seconds or a second to run,
Milliseconds.
even milliseconds to run,
Yeah.
because you're running that code at at the chip level. You're running it
Compiled code
in
level.
compiled code, at the machine language level on the processor. And of course, since you have access to the backplane, you can move your data back and forth very, very quickly, and that solved a lot of solutions for people.
Okay, well, with that, what if, I know some customers out there developed in the PC world. Linux can be a different animal. I think some of our viewers out there may have some questions about Linux. Give them kind of exposure of what they need to know from a Linux perspective.
Sure. Yeah. And what I've seen often is that a lot of people are kind of afraid of Linux, or they fear it because they don't know it. Maybe they've never used it, or they've heard that it's really complicated and everything is command line based, and you have to remember and type out thousands of characters for every command.
Yeah.
Now, in the modern day, Linux has really come a long way. There are Linux desktops that rival Windows desktops as far as the operation of having your start menu, if you will, where basically all your controls for your main computer are there. The windows and the minimize, maximize, the close, the menu bars. A lot of that is mimicking what is happening in Windows and the Mac world. So Linux is the two worlds that are not so far apart anymore. They're coming very close together. So learning Linux is not that difficult. And anybody that's used a Mac, whether they know it or not, they're actually using a Linux machine. So the OS X was built on a Linux kernel and built up from there. And of course, they designed their own user interface, and it became the Mac. So even the shells that Linux runs on are getting more and more common. Microsoft in Windows 10, if anybody's familiar with that, has now put a Linux shell where they call Linux on, or it's Windows system for Linux, and that gives you an actual Linux shell, a real Linux shell. It will run real Linux applications on Windows, and a lot of people are moving to that and using that, getting familiar with it, because I think they see the trend is, especially with all the IoT and embedded Linux and the way things are going, that a lot of serious people aren't just living on Windows and going by that anymore. They're learning this stuff. So the fear of Linux, I think, is really, I don't want to say unfounded, but I think it's getting relaxed.
Yeah, it's not as big a deal as people think it is.
Exactly.
And so I know you talked to me once about an application you had developed for a PC Windows environment, and you said, let me see if I can make this run on our Linux device here, right, our LDM module.
Yes.
Kind of walk through kind of what you had to do there.
Yeah, no, a lot of code that is, speaking in terms of writing code even, code written to run on Windows is not very hard to convert over to Linux. Now, oftentimes, even in the open source world, what we're seeing now is a trend towards everybody writing their code to be what's called open platform, where they call it runs on the big three. It'll run on Windows, it'll run on Mac, and it'll run on Linux. And oftentimes, all you're doing is you're making a few lines of code changes where maybe Microsoft does something one way, but in Linux they do it slightly different. So you just have a line of code that says if we're running Windows, do this. If we're running under Linux, do this. So oftentimes very little code has to change to make a program that was dedicated to run on Windows to make it compatible with Linux. Now, and of course, we're not talking about full user interface applications.
Right.
The LDM obviously is not designed for that. We don't want it to do that. It's designed to, with the Linux philosophy, of do one thing and do it really well. So anybody that's written command line utilities on Windows is probably familiar with this, where it won't take many changes to make it run, to make a, say, a simple program that calculates the output of some number. It might take no changes to make it run on Linux. It might take a couple lines here and there, but the conversion is actually a lot less daunting, I guess, than a lot of people may think. It's really easy to convert, and there's lots of help out there, and places you can go to get help on that conversion, including again me. I can help if they have something that runs. I can show them the quickest way to move it to Linux.
Well, very good. So we talked about it a bit with our audience out there. Talked about some of its capabilities. It's wide open. This product's very powerful. And what are some of the things, if I'm going to use this, I'm going to be successful, what are some of the basic things I'm going to need to know so that, I can be successful deploying the solution?
Well, as we've talked a lot, you're going to need to know some C or C++ programming skills. I've talked to a few people that haven't programmed in C in 20 or even 30 years, and they're familiar with COBOL and Fortran, but when they went through college, they also learned C. And with minimal help, I've actually got them running programs on the LDM. Cool. So it doesn't take you don't have to be a master. A lot of people are afraid of C because they've heard of the dangers of, you're managing your own memory and you can shoot yourself in the foot really easily. And all that's true. However, when you're building a program for the LDM, you're designing something that's going to run in a very limited space. It's going to do what it's designed to do. It doesn't have to be designed to interact with the entire world and be ready for the system to do this or the computer to tell it to do that, and it has to watch out for this. And a lot of that kind of stuff is unfounded, and programs are not as scary as one might think. Even having C# and Java skills convert very easily over to C because they're designed after that language. So it's not too bad. The some of the other things that are helpful, again, even not necessarily required, is having a knowledge of the Allen Bradley ladder programming, how the Allen Bradley PLCs work, as far as how they exchange data across the backplane. And once again, you don't have to be a master to use it, but if you have a general knowledge of it, it can certainly open your mind to ideas where you can say, I know how I can do that. Here's a solution for that. Same as knowing about SIP messaging and things like that. Having a good understanding of that just gives you more power, gives you more options, and will give you a way to find a solution to your problem that is either better than you might have originally thought, or really helpful. And then of course you have Google. Google is the answer to the question that everybody's asked. So if you know how to Google, you've got you basically have almost everything you know. Combine that with having access to me on the phone and having Google, you're pretty much set. You'll know exactly what you need to know.
Cool. So what are some other resources out there? I'm now saying, I think I can do this. What else might I want to go look at?
Yeah, there's tons of available resources on the internet, as everybody's familiar with now. The internet has really gotten so big that just about any code you'd ever want to write has pretty much already been written, and half of it is open source. So the whole world can use it, and it's available. There's places like GitHub and SourceForge that host a lot of free source code that you can use to get started. You don't have to start and design this protocol from the ground up, or if you need a special protocol, you need Modbus along with some other protocols in your whole solution. You can go get libmodbus right out of the open source community, compile it, and that's half your challenge now. Now you can focus on the code that you need to write, that's putting these pieces together to accomplish your goal. So it saves you a lot of trouble doing that. There are programming sites like Stack Overflow that help you answer any programming questions you might have. If you're not sure how to do something in C, but you know how to do it in Java, you can search for questions there, because there's, I would almost bet money on it that somebody has asked that question before. So the answers are there. There's even sample source code available that you can get right off those sites and help you along your way. There's and Stack Overflow is part of a larger what they call the Stack Exchange, and with that there's they have a whole Unix Stack Exchange that is a site where you have access to people that have developed Linux, that have worked on the actual code that is Linux, and they're there answering questions on just general Unix knowledge. How do I copy a file from A to B? How do I create a backup of my file system? Those questions are out there, and they're easily answered. And these are some of my favorite sites where I like to go to get those answers. And then, as I mentioned before, they've got me as a resource. If there's, if they don't understand how to use one of our APIs, or they're not sure maybe which API call they should use, or they have an API call that's not doing what they think it should, give me a call. Here at our ProSoft support, they can create a ticket, and they can ask our customer service representatives for me by name, and then I will gladly help them either answer their question, or if they have a problem, I can often I get email through code, and I'll look at it and give it a good once over and make suggestions and say, well, here's, you're doing this here, that could be a danger spot. Why don't you make it like this? And just help them with general questions they have on how to do things. So we want to make sure that they're successful with this. You know, we don't want to just leave them out there and say, well, you bought it, now figure it out.
Right.
No, not at all. We want to make sure they're, that they are successful with this and that they're able to use it and do what they need to do with it.
Good. Well, ProSoft, we want to help customers. We want to help you be successful. Want to introduce this product to you. If you didn't know about it, give you a little more details about what it can do. Hopefully this has stimulated some thought and ideas of what you might be able to do. Again, we're here to be able to help. You can call us. We can talk through opportunities, things you're thinking of you could do. Want to be helpful. We'd like to open it up now. If there are any questions, we're monitoring the question session. I see none are in there right now, but now is a good time if you want to put any questions in there. We've been more than willing to answer your time. We have a few minutes left here. So while we're waiting for any questions, if you're in the mode of typing in. If you're like me, it could take a while. But if you're typing in your questions there, we also want to let you know that ProSoft is going to continue to offer webinars like this where we want to educate, train our people. If you haven't gone to our website in a while, go there. Go to our training our training video page. We have training videos with all kinds of helpful videos. We've got one on Modbus. You just want to understand how Modbus works. We have over 500,000 views on our Modbus video. You want to understand RS485 a little better. So we're doing a lot of educational, informational activities in there. We want to be helpful. If we feel if we can make you smarter, you'll be successful. You'll want to do business with ProSoft. We've done some recently and are adding more to it all the time in the idea if you're looking at anything in the wireless arena. You know, you're dealing with 802.11, some of the challenges there, things you should consider. Check out our website, get on there, check these out. They're very, very useful. We had a lot of great feedback from customers. We'll continue making those for you out there. As you get questions, ideas, please send those in to us. Call us, email us. We're there for you to help you out. I don't see any more questions coming in with that. So if there are no more questions, this session has been recorded. We will make this available. We're sending you out an email afterwards. Look forward to other emails from us to come from us for invites to other webinars about other capabilities. And hopefully we can keep you up there and making you the best you can be in the control world. Have a great day, great afternoon, or great evening, depending on where you're at. And thanks for attending.